Hey guys, here we are today with, it's going to be a film study on Errol Spence, and I don't want to be like part of any drama or shenanigans about other people. I generally like to talk well about everybody. You know, everybody's learning boxing, everybody's growing in the sport. Even the best fighters in the world are constantly learning something every day, or they should be. But I kind of want to talk about the myth of what makes a good fighter. You know, people kind of talk about, well, I'm going to call this guy out. There are very few people in the boxing world that I just can't stand, and Doug Fisher is one of them. I don't know why that guy has a job talking about boxing at all. He literally doesn't know a goddamn thing about boxing. He might be able to tell you names and places and dates and how many times some guy fought for the title and, you know, like a boxing historian. But he doesn't know anything about boxing. None of that is going to teach anybody, you know, when he's giving commentary about the sport of boxing. It's not healthy for boxing. People don't have an ability to connect with what he's saying because now they got to go on Wikipedia. And anyway, it doesn't matter. He said some things. He was doing the, God, I hate that guy. But he said some things on the undercards, the prelims that they call them. I like that they're stealing that from MMA. Boxing could learn a lot from MMA for sure. But he said some things on the telecast about the fighters and the ones that were on the card, saying, oh, he's a hard puncher and he's really fast and he's got great fundamentals and he's got this and that, and that's why he's going to be a boxing star, because he's got great fundamentals. And this guy doesn't even know what fundamentals are. You know, we're talking about boxing, and in boxing, your fundamentals are not your jab. Right? It's not how you throw your jab. It's not the speed and power of your right hand or the right hook or the left hook or punching and your basic movement stuff. Like, although basics are the fundamentals, that's not the fundamentals of fighting. That stuff has nearly nothing to do with the actual fight. Like, it's important, yeah. Sometimes you're going to be able to beat someone because you punch harder than them or you're faster than them. But you're not going to be able to beat really good fighters, even if they don't have the technique. You know, and that was another key word that Doug Fisher used a lot. Oh, he's got great technique. The application of your technique is the most important part. You know, and we'll get to see a little bit of it in this fight. You know, Chris Algieri doesn't have the greatest technique. You know, whereas Errol Spence has phenomenal technique. He's extremely sharp. He's an extremely hard puncher. He's quick. His technique is like nearly flawless. But the application of his technique, in my opinion, is wanting. And we're gonna see. I'm gonna talk a little bit about that, but I want to kind of explain real quick what all that stuff means, right? So if you're building a house, you need tools to build a house. The better your tools, you know, your hammer and your drill and your saw and your screwdrivers and whatever the hell else it takes to build a house, I don't know. The better those tools, the easier it is to build and finish your house. The cruder the tools you have, like say you don't have a hammer, you got a rock, right? Or you have to cut things, with a rock that you had to sharpen. You know, maybe all you have is a rock. That's all you have to build a house. You know, now taking those two sets of tools, the person with the better tools is going to be able to build a house better, right? But that is not indicative of how you build a house, right? Say the guy with only a rock has the blueprint for building a house, but the guy with all the tools doesn't know how to build a house. You would think in most situations that the guy with all the tools knows how to build a house better than the guy with just a rock. And the way that this applies to boxing is having crisp, sharp punches, being fast, you know, speed and power are a little bit different in terms of like tools. You kind of want to gauge them in a separate category, kind of. But having a crisp jab, having sharp movement, having a good right hand, having a good uppercut, having good pivots, those are tools. That's not how you build a house. You don't win a fight with those things, right? They help you win a fight. You use them, but the application of those things is what wins the fight for you, right? Now, a guy who doesn't have the sharpest tools may still be able to build a house, i.e. win a fight, better than someone who has better tools than he does, because he knows how, right? He knows how to control someone. He knows how to use hand control. He knows how to set his punches up. He knows how to bait you into something. And even if he throws wild punches, if he baits you into one of those wild punches and knocks you out, he outfought you. That's all that fighting is. Anyway, I kind of ranted for like 6 freaking minutes, man, and we haven't even gone over 1 minute of film study. But I hope some of that made sense. Maybe I can do like a video on that stuff separately to kind of talk about it. But it's one of those really interesting things that surrounds, I'll say, the hype of Errol Spence. Is everyone's looking at his tools and no one's focusing on whether he knows how to build a house or not. So let's take a look. Let's figure it out. Oh, let me turn off this sound. Let's see if he knows how to build a house. So he comes out. If you look at his guard, look at how slow he's moving. Very methodical, right? Not wasting any energy. Not a lot of movement. He's jabbing a little bit. But what is Chris Algieri? And granted, 10 seconds into the fight, what does Chris Algieri do? He feints him, and Errol Spence moves back, right? Jabs him again, and what happens? He throws this jab, and he commits to it completely, and you can't really tell if that wild left hook thing that Chris Algieri landed, if he hit him with it or not. But if Chris Algieri had better tools, right? Like we talked about. If he had better technique, right, you can guarantee that a fighter with better technique would have landed that punch. I do think he lands it, but Errol Spence kind of just commits to his jab 100%, right, and he eats a counter for it. And that's something you really want to watch for a fighter. Although he has good technique, he's flashy and hard punching and quick and whatever, the application of these tools is more important, right? Look at this. What was that from Chris Algieri? You know, nothing against the man. 2-time, world champion, former kickboxing champion. This guy knows a lot about freaking fighting. Like, no doubt, he's a tactically, he's a very sound fighter. But he just hasn't been boxing for a long time, so his tools are not as sharp as someone like Errol Spence, who's been doing this since they were like in the womb, and only been part of it one sport. So, oh, whoops, I didn't get to move back. So here we have Errol Spence feinting now, right? Because he just got countered, showing that he respects Chris Algieri's game. And look at another thing that I want you to look at is Errol Spence is not moving his head at all. His head is in the same spot, right? He's feinting a little bit with his hand, but he's not moving his head at all. He's not using any upper body. He's giving only one look. He fights out of only one look, right? A little bit right there, but Chris Algieri, on the other hand, he's moving, dipping to the left, right? Moving his head, coming back to the right, moves under that, he's got a kind of a much more active guard. He's bouncing up and down, feinting. He's able to like push Spence back just with feints. He didn't even throw any punches. And Spence is moving back. There you go, Errol Spence giving like a little bit more active guard, but his head is in the same spot, right? There he is vying for hand control a little bit. Whoops, this video's acting up a little bit. Going to touch gloves a little bit, which is very common among southpaw and right-handed fighters. So you can't give too much credit for that. And he does something really interesting though, right? With this jab, he throws it out there, but he holds his hand out there too to kind of make sure that Chris Algieri can't counter him with another shot, right? Because even though it doesn't land like super clean, oh man, I gotta point this out. Think about tools, right? Tools. Look at this ugly feint from Chris Algieri. What is that, man? That poor guy. Anyway, I love Chris Algieri. He's a nice guy. But Spence again, moving forward, same guard. He's not changing it up. There's no rhythm to it. Eats a body shot. Just moves back. He takes it. You know, not a big shot. You know, Chris Algieri's not a big puncher. Errol Spence, same guard, feints a jab, touches him with another jab while establishing lead foot dominance. Does that faze Chris Algieri? No, not even a little bit. He completely telegraphs what he's doing, takes lead foot dominance, and throws a straight left into his guard. And what does Chris Algieri do? Rolls the hook and circles out. Good ring generalship from Chris Algieri, even though he's the one backing up. He's not exactly the ring general, but he knows where he is at all times, and he's pretty much fighting where he wants to fight. Even though, you know, if you had to score it, Spence would be the quote-unquote ring general. But again, look at Spence's guard. Look at where his head is, right? He's not moving his head at all. Whereas Chris Algieri, right, dip to the left, dip to the right. You know, it's really subtle, but changing your head slot so that your opponent, when you're standing in front of your opponent, they can't just throw a punch right into you, right where your head is and isn't moving. Makes them think, you know, now they have to set it up off of those little movements. But also, when you don't have any movement like that, you kind of telegraph your punches more than you would like, right? Because there's no rhythm that you can punch off of. So every time you explode, your opponent just knows punches are coming, right? Whereas if you have kind of an active guard, right there, like Chris Algieri right here. Look at this. Look at this active guard. Dips to the left, dips down, right? Feints a little bit. And you can't really tell that he's going to be punching off of these movements. And you can't tell when he's not going to punch. But you can kind of tell almost every time when Errol Spence is going to throw a punch. Look at him. See how Errol Spence feints, right? Feint right there. But he's not. It's not off of anything, so you know that there might be a punch. So Chris Algieri brings his guard up, right? He does the same thing right there, right? Feint, and Chris Algieri sticks his hand out to time him, and he knows that a punch might come right there because looking at his feet. You know, he can see that his feet are moving, and he's going to punch when he moves off of his front foot. Again, right there, Chris Algieri is able to very easily use Spence's rhythm to get away from him right there. And that's because Spence doesn't have an active rhythm or an active guard. He's just kind of, you know, plodding along. I don't know. I didn't say this at the beginning of the video. I'll probably have it in the title, though, so me going over it here is irrelevant. Spence is not a boxer. He's not a boxer. He's a puncher. He has a great technique. Most people don't have to resort to punching. You know, it's kind of like looked down on, I guess. I don't know what the stigma is. But Spence wants to close the distance, get you on the ropes, and land huge punches. Sorry about that. And he wants to land huge punches and knock you out. He's not really interested in having a boxing match. He doesn't really counter punch at all, and that's another problem with his game. I didn't talk about that at all, but his hand feinting, and we'll go over this at the end of the round too. So I'll just skip that. We'll get back to the round, and we'll talk about what Errol Spence does and doesn't do in this round. I think I will be doing the whole fight. Ooh, and what happens here? So I want you to look at Chris Algieri, and even though he's not as sharp, his movements aren't as defined as Errol Spence. Gives him a feint here, ducks down, feints there, feints out to the left. And even though Errol Spence sees it coming, I don't think he gets that jab in. He's doing a lot to disguise his punches, you know, and then he gets in, and now this is one thing that I don't like about Errol Spence. It's smart, you know, to get your hand on your opponent's head, right? But to stop them from punching, he does eat this body shot, right? But Errol Spence puts all his weight on his head which is fine. You're supposed to control your opponent, but he does it and he throws a punch. You know, you're not supposed to hold your opponent's head down and punch, right? It's a pretty dirty tactic to hold your opponent's head down. Number one, that's obviously illegal. But to hold your opponent's head down and punch, you know, it's two different fouls. It kind of combines into one. But that's something that Spence does a lot. And I'll show you in the throughout the course of this fight. If you wanted to pause it right now and go take a look at PBC highlights of Errol Spence versus Algieri, almost all of them, if you look really closely, watch them in slow-mo, almost all of them are Spence holding Algieri's head down and punching him, or holding him behind the head with one hand and punching him with the other. But anyway, if you look at it, you know, he's not in time to control him, eats the body shot right there, holds his head down, and he does let go before he actually strikes with the punch, you know, thank God, but it's not a legal tactic, right? Anyway, getting back to it, another thing that Errol Spence is kind of guilty of when he's plodding forward, not only are his movements easy to read, but he commits to even his feints, right? His probing shot right there. He got exactly what he wanted out of Algieri right here. He probed, put his hand out, but why did he do that? You know, was he just baiting the counter? Is he baiting the counter so that he can tell Algieri that I know you're trying to counter me, to get him to stop countering? But if he knows he's trying to counter him and he knows the punch is going to come, why doesn't he punch? And that's because and look how slow it was, right? And Algieri's not going anywhere. Look at him. He just stands straight back up, you know, nothing. Why isn't Errol Spence counterpunching off of his probe, right? That's what you would call that if he's using that to get Algieri to react so that he can punch to where he reacts, or counterpunch him when he makes him counter the probe. But Errol Spence doesn't counter. You know, maybe he'll counter later. We'll see. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. But we'll move on, and we'll talk again more about it at the end of the round. Here he is, feinting with the jab, taking lead foot dominance, and throwing a body shot. I think he throws a body shot. It looks like it kind of... You can't really tell. The quality of this fight that I got is so poor. I'm very sorry about that. But you can kind of see his glove kind of on Algieri's trunks, really low on the trunks, not like a real landed punch. And I don't think that that's because Algieri pushed it down. But we won't even talk about it. It doesn't matter. What I want to talk about that is he jabs forward, and then he takes lead foot dominance while using his hand to control his opponent, which is good. But then he punches to where he thinks the opening is. You know, he hasn't probed. He hasn't feinted to see how Algieri's going to react to that. He's just punching to where the openings usually are, right? And he's committing to a huge body shot that he's not sure is going to land, right? And the less times that you commit to punches that you aren't sure are going to land, the less opportunities you're giving your opponent to counter you and knock you out, or for them to set up their offense against you because you missed a punch, right? Like, say Algieri were to slip to the inside or to the outside and catch him with a counter instead of having thrown that left hook, right? Or maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, and he knows that he's going to throw the left hook, and that's his counter, so he throws a body shot. Maybe that's true too. But he hasn't done that off of the lead foot dominance. He's only done that against like a real jab. So, you know, it's kind of up in the air. You know, it doesn't really matter. But Errol Spence is committing to these punches. That's the important part. Errol Spence does do something really good here. He knows that Algieri's looking to slide off the ropes right here. Notice how he doesn't throw a punch, right? He kind of waits for Algieri, and while Algieri moves, he throws this right hook, it would be. And I can't really tell if it lands or if it lands on Algieri's arm. That's not important. It doesn't matter. The fact that he throws it, he's aware, and he doesn't chase Algieri off the ropes with a punch. He lets Algieri move on his own. That's good. That's good ring generalship and understanding of your opponent's strategy. But anyway, moving on. Again, look at right here. Look at Errol Spence's guard, right? His head is in the same spot in all of this whole little frame right here. He's kind of feinting a little bit with his hand and moving his foot forward, keeping all his weight on his left hand, so you know the left hand's supposed to come. So Chris Algieri is just kind of baiting it. Ooh, what is that? So let's break this down. So he's feinting, feints, lead foot dominance, right? Doesn't fool Chris Algieri. Chris Algieri knows the left hand's coming. I think it still gets through. But Chris Algieri knows it's there. He should turn away from it for sure. Errol Spence controls him with the jab. Doesn't throw a jab, but like probes. And he does this really well when he gets his opponents on the ropes. Throws his body shot. I'm not sure if it lands. You can say it does. It doesn't really matter. It's not important, because this is what I want to talk about. So he does find an opening. We'll say the right hand lands. He does find an opening. That's really good. But now he goes to this off of it, and he starts pulling Chris Algieri's head down and hitting him at the same time. Not only is that punch low, right, but he's holding Chris Algieri's head so he can't move, and he just hit him with a low blow, pulling Chris Algieri still. Chris Algieri is not the one moving forward because Errol Spence has a hold of his head. Now Errol Spence throws an uppercut while he's holding his head, right? What is this? This is such dirty and horrible fighting. Now the referee's breaking them. Stop, 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 he yells. And with the referee still in there, Errol Spence is still pulling him and punching him. You know, where's the sportsmanship? You know, like, that is... It makes me so sad that people are so excited to see this guy, you know. In my opinion, Chris Algieri was doing a really good job during the course of this fight. And he was making Errol Spence miss. He was feinting him a lot. Errol Spence wasn't being as active as he wants. And so Errol Spence kind of moved for these tactics, you know. And where's Chris Algieri's time to recover, right? He got hit with a low blow. Then he got held and hit. And Spence is a huge puncher, you know. Anyway, we'll move back on to the fight, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. There we go. Chris Algieri feints, slips the jab, and baits Errol Spence into throwing a jab off of him, slips it. I guess it kind of touches him. It doesn't matter. But baits him into throwing it because he knows that he's going to commit to it, and throws a right hand. Now, again, talking about Chris Algieri's toolbox, his tools are not the sharpest, and he's not able to land that punch. But he was able to bait Spence into throwing it, and if he had a sharper toolbox, he definitely would have landed it because Errol Spence commits to so many of his shots. The only punches and such that he doesn't really commit to are when he's looking to get lead foot dominance. As you've seen a couple of times, he'll kind of feint a probing jab. And I'll talk a little bit about it. So right now, look at how straight up Errol Spence is at the moment. And he commits to his jab when he steps on his front foot. He puts all his weight on his front foot, right? And then that's how you know he's going to commit to his jab, because he doesn't really throw like hard 1-2s. Usually he's just trying to close the distance with the probing jab, get lead foot dominance, and then throw a couple left hands. But that's kind of one of Errol Spence's tells, especially for this fight. A little bit for the Leonard Bundu fight too, which I'm thinking about breaking down as well. There are much less fouls in that fight than there are in this one. But again, he does throw a committed jab, and he gets his hand out in front of him to catch a counter if he thinks it's coming. Takes lead foot dominance, controls him with his second left hand, or with his second jab, and then throws a right hand that Chris Algieri knows is coming again. But then he does catch him with the body shot right there, which is a good shot, finding that extra opening. Again, jab, jab, not hard jabs, right? He's committing to them, but they're just so that he can get lead foot dominance and take the body shot and the body shot. And I want to talk about these punches, or this combination in general. He didn't set these punches up, right? Like, there was no work to be done. If you find a southpaw versus a right hand and you establish lead foot dominance, those punches are basically always there. So as far as like skill, like, it's good that he knows that, right? That those openings are going to be there. But he didn't have to set them up. There wasn't a lot of work, probe, lead foot dominance, and throw 2 punches. Like, okay. I mean, good for him for going for it and landing the punches, but it wasn't a lot of setup for him. And it almost looks like that lands, but I think that was actually Spence's glove I was looking at. So let's see. Throws the hook. Yeah, I was looking at Spence's glove. He misses, but again, Chris Algieri's tools, they're just not super sharp. Even though I do think that Chris Algieri is a very good fighter, he doesn't have the physical characteristics, that people like to poke at and be like, ooh. Anyway, Errol Spence committing to his jab, right? And then a body shot. I think that was low. That sucks. If Chris Algieri was he had better tools, it wouldn't have been a low punch. But so that's not important. But and I'll talk about why all of that's important, why the committing to the punches is so important. Ooh, that doesn't look good. Chris Algieri kind of gets his foot tangled right there, you see, and he kind of turns around. Again, not the sharpest tools. But Chris Algieri is still a good fighter. He was not prepared for this fight. But anyway, the reason that this is important is because Kell Brook likes to counterpunch. He's going to be fighting Kell Brook next, and Kell Brook likes to counterpunch. Kell Brook is the tools that he has at his disposal are much more refined than the ones that Chris Algieri has. He's way better at counterpunching, way sharper. And Errol Spence is never going to get away with standing in front of Kell Brook. Kell Brook also likes to lead. I've been watching a lot of his southpaw fights. He likes to lead with the straight right hand, and that's one of the reasons why I'm pointing out the fact that Errol Spence stands straight up and down. Excuse me. He doesn't move his head with his active guard. He moves his front hand a little bit. He doesn't move his backhand at all. And he doesn't really change levels. He doesn't move side to side. He's very, very ordinary in that sense, in the sense of his guard. And if you look at this round and you take away all the punches that Errol Spence landed while he was holding on to Algieri, I'm not going to say it was a close round because I would rather take every single punch that Chris Algieri landed in this fight or in this round twice than half the set of punches that Errol Spence landed. But how do you say it? But it was much less of a landslide. If you take those punches out, the round was much more dull, and Chris Algieri did a good job of nullifying Errol Spence's offense. And granted, Kell Brook is no Chris Algieri. Chris Algieri is no Kell Brook. So the things that we saw that Errol Spence did well, knowing where his openings are. I don't think he created any openings, which is what you want to do. You want to make your opponent, like when you're probing, you want to make your opponent react and then fight off of his reaction, right? And that's where all of the value is in probing. Vladimir Klitschko tried a lot of probing against Anthony Joshua, but because he's not a counterpuncher, he wasn't able to take advantage of it, even though he was in control of the fight, most of the fight. And that's kind of like how Errol Spence is. You see him pushing forward and moving Chris Algieri back, but he's not doing anything. He's not countering the counter punches from Chris Algieri. He's only taking the punches that he knows are open. He's not opening up any new ones, right? So when he got in with the probe and then take lead foot dominance, he threw 2 body shots. It's really important that he knows that those body shots are open when he's in a pinch and he's looking for offense. But there were other times where he probed. He got Chris Algieri to counter or try to counter with his straight right. And Errol Spence didn't punish him for it, even though he had control of Chris Algieri by making him react first. He wasn't able to capitalize with that information. And that shows one of the holes in his game. Is his inability to counterpunch. And we'll go over it more throughout the course of this fight. Maybe there'll be more instances in which he does counterpunch, and I can kind of take that back and add that back to his resume. But so far, it kind of looks like he's just a puncher. You know, he has phenomenal technique, but he's looking to close the distance and land body shots. Close the distance with his probing, feinting jab. And then land hard body shots or back you up against the ropes and land huge punches there. Not really trying to outbox you or open you up so that he can make more openings and land punches, but just kind of trying to punch on top of the holding and hitting that he exhibits. Again, like a puncher strat, holding your opponent's head down. Gotta hope he doesn't get away with that in the Kell Brook fight, but to be fair, Kell Brook has got his share of holding and hitting too. His is a little more sneaky than Errol Spence's, so I don't doubt that he won't be able to compete with him in that area. But it'll be interesting. Anyway, I think I covered everything for this round. This is a 30-minute video. Dang, that sucks. I'm sorry, guys, for all you guys who endured this. I appreciate it. Yeah. I'm going to end it here. I'll talk more about why the counterpunching and stuff is important in video 2, and I'll do my own separate keys to victory probably for Errol Spence and Kell Brook. So stay tuned, like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you think. Thanks, guys.